You can be serious, Dad. My voice wavered as I stared at him across his massive mahogany desk. My father leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling slowly, composed as ever. He set his cigar in the ashtray with deliberate finality. This is not up for discussion, Catherine. My fist clenched at my sides, but I refused to back down. So that's it, I said, my words sharp. You'd rather hand everything to someone who doesn't even creep and let me prove myself, all because I'm a woman? He didn't flinch. This firm is for your brother to manage, he said, his tone firm, immovable. You've done well with your education, and you'll make a fine wife one day, but this is not your place. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. My name is Catherine Mercer. I'm 26 years old, a Harvard-educated lawyer, and the daughter of Henry Mercer, owner of Mercer Association of the most powerful law firms in Dallas. For as long as I could remember, I had worked to prove myself excelling in school, debating my way to the top, graduating with honors or to follow in my father's footsteps, but standing in his office, surrounded by the rich scent of leather and cigars, I felt my world tilt. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how much I loved the law. To him, I was just his daughter, a name to be married of. I met his gaze, my voice steadier now. Grant doesn't care about this firm, Dad. He barely scraped through community college. He's reckless, and he has no idea how to run a business. You know that. My father sighed, rubbing his temple like I was the one being difficult. Grant will learn. He's my son. It's his birthright to take over Mercer Associates. And you, his voice softened just slightly, you have other options, a future that doesn't involve the stress of running a firm. I'm protecting you. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Protecting me? I shook my head. You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this. I've worked harder than anyone, including Grant, and you know it. But you won't even give me a chance because you're too stuck in your ways to see what I'm capable of. His expression hardened. I had pushed too far. That's enough, Catherine. His voice was sharp, final. We're done here. I stormed out of his office, my heels echoing through the marble halls of our estate. In the parlor, my mother was arranging flowers. She looked up as I passed, her expression soft but weary. Catherine, she said gently, what happened? I turned to her, frustration and hurt tightening in my chest. He won't let me work at the firm, I said, my voice breaking. He's handing everything to Grant, and he expects me to smile and accept it. She sighed, her hand stealing over the flowers. Your father, he has his ways, she said carefully. Maybe it's best not to push him, dear. He means well. I stared at her, stunned. Means well, I repeated. Ma'am, he's throwing away everything I've worked for just because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that? She lowered her gaze, the weight of years spent in quiet submission evident on her face. I just don't want to see you hurt, Catherine, she murmured. Sometimes it's easier to let things be. Her words sailed between us like a heavy silence. And in that moment, I knew I was on my own. That night, lying in bed, my father's words pressed down on me like a weight I could no longer bear. I thought of the late nights, the sacrifices, the endless battles to be taken seriously. And for what? To be told I didn't belong. To be dismissed, disregarded, cast aside. By morning, my decision was made. I was halfway through packing when the door creaked open. My mother stood in the doorway, her face pale with worry. Catherine, what are you doing? Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his brows furrowed. What's all this? He demanded. Where do you think you're going? Grant showed up last, still in his robe, leaning lazily against the doorframe. Packing for a vacation, sis. He smirked. I snapped my suitcase shut and stood tall. I'm leaving, I said simply. Since I'm not welcome at the firm and apparently don't belong in this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do. My father's face darkened. My mother clutched her pearls, her eyes glassy with honest tears. Catherine, she pleaded, don't do this. Let's talk. I shook my head. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities clear. My father stepped closer, his voice cold. Don't be ridiculous. This is your home. Where else would you go? And for what? To make some sort of point. I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Dad, I said, to make a point that I'm worth more than being cast aside for someone who hasn't earned a damn thing. You made it clear last night that I have no place in your firm, so I'll find a firm that values what I bring to the table. Gran let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Kath, he said, throwing a tantrum just because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom. His smugness was the final straw. This isn't a tantrum, Grant, I shot back. It's me taking control of my life, something you've never had to do because everything's been handed to you. My father raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said. Catherine, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family. I lifted my suitcase. No, Dad, I belong somewhere unvalued, and clearly, that's not here. I walked past them, my stepdaddy, as I descended the grand staircase. My mother followed, her voice trembling. Catherine, please don't go, she whispered. We can't figure this out as a family. I stopped at the base of the stairs and turned to her woman who had spent her life swallowing her own voice to keep the peace. Ma'am, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending things will change if I stay. They won't. My father stood at the top of the stairs, watching silently, his face unreadable. Grant lounged against the banister, unaffected, like my leaving meant nothing. But to me, it meant everything, and I would prove them all wrong. I opened the front door and glanced back one last time. When you're ready to treat me like more than just a daughter who needs to marry well, you know where to find me, I said, my voice steady but firm. Then I stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting against my skin as I closed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, I secured an interview at one of the most respected law firms in Dallas. They didn't care who my father was. They cared about my credentials, my drive, my abilities. When I walked into the office, I wasn't Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, Harvard graduate, determined attorney, ready to prove myself. By the end of the week, they offered me a position, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not for my last name, but for what I could do. The work was challenging, demanding, but incredibly rewarding. I thrived in an environment where I wasn't being compared to anyone else. My new boss, Richard Hayes, sharp and modern, took me under his wing. He saw my potential, valued my insights, and pushed me to take on more responsibility. Within months, I was handling high-profile cases, earning the respect of my colleagues, and gaining a reputation as someone to watch. It wasn't the life I had envisioned growing up, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. But as much as I thrived professionally, the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how justified it felt. There were moments, quiet ones, like walking into my empty apartment after a long day when the weight of it all would crash down on me. I miss my mother's gentle presence, even if she never stood up for me. I missed the chaos Grant brought to the house, as infuriating as it was. But what hurt most was knowing that my father didn't think twice about letting me go. Months passed, and I poured every ounce of energy into my work. The cases were demanding, often leaving me late into the night. But I thrived under the pressure. With every victory, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Richard Hayes continued to push me forward, assigning me to high-stakes cases. Soon, I gained a reputation as one of the firm's rising stars. The growth wasn't just professional, it was personal, too. I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions without worrying about whether they would please my father or feed into the mold my family had made for me. Every step forward felt like proof that I was more than they had ever given me credit for. I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, and I was making a name for myself on my own terms. One afternoon, Richard called me into his office. His office was spacious, but unacademic like him. He gestured for me to sit and leaned back in his chair, his sharp blue eyes watching me closely. "Catherine," he began, his voice calm and controlled, "I have a case I think you're ready for. It's high stakes, complicated, and it's going to put you in the spotlight." I nodded, intrigued. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "We're representing a client in a major litigation against Mercer Associates. They're suing your father's firm for negligence in a contract dispute. The stakes are enormous, and the case is already drawing attention." He paused, studying me intently. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. "You want me to represent someone suing my father's firm?" I finally asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard nodded. "I know it's personal, Catherine, but that's exactly why I want you on this case. You know how Mercer Associates operates, and you're one of the sharpest lawyers we have. If anyone can win this, it's you." I took a deep breath, trying to process what he was asking. "Richard," I said slowly, "you realize what this means for me, personally and professionally. This isn't just any case, it's my family." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his tone unwavering. "I understand that," he said firmly, "but this is your chance to show what you're capable of, to take on the people who've underestimated you and prove them all wrong. This could be the defining case of your career." I sat back in the chair, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on me. "This is a lot to take in," I said quietly. Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "I don't expect you to decide right now," he said. "It's a big decision, and I know how personal this is, but think about it. You've worked your whole life to get here, Catherine. Don't let anything hold you back." I met his gaze, grateful for his patience. "Would it be all right if I sleep on it?" I asked, my voice more measured. "I need to think about how this could affect everything, not just my career." I trailed off, uncertain how to finish. "Take all the time you need," Richard said, "but don't take too long. We need to move quickly on this, and I want you on the team. Let me know by the end of the day tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything at stake. Taking the case meant going up against my father's man who had dismissed me, handed everything to Grant without a second thought. It meant challenging my family's league-side name that had opened so many doors for me, even as it closed others. But it also meant proving, once and for all, that I could stand on my own, even if it meant burning the last bridge to my family. For 2 days, I went back and forth, weighing the risks and rewards. I thought about my father's cold dismissal of everything I'd worked for, about my mother's quiet resignation, and about Grant's smug sense of entitlement. But I also thought about the chance to show them so everyone said I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. By the end of the second day, I made my decision. I walked into Richard's office the next morning, my shoulders squared and my voice steady. "I'll take the case," I said simply. Richard's face lit up with approval. "I knew you would," he said with a grin. "Now, let's get to work." The day of the first litigation preceding arrived. The air was thick with tension. As I walked into the courtroom, I gripped my briefcase tightly, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor with every step. My client walked beside me, confident in my abilities, but my focus was elsewhere. As I reached the front of the courtroom, I saw Fanny's father and Grant sitting at the opposing table, their faces turned toward me, and the shock was instantaneous. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as recognition hit. Grant's mouth fell open slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise with a smug smirk, though I could see the unease flicker in his eyes. I set my briefcase down on the table and met their stares head-on. I refused to waver. I had a job to do, and nothing their surprise, their disapproval would shake me. For a fleeting moment, my father's gaze softened. Then, just as quickly, he masked it, leaning in to whisper something to Grant. I didn't care. Let them talk. I was ready. As the proceedings began, I stepped into my role effortlessly. Every motion, every argument, every document I presented was delivered with precision. My tone remained steady, my demeanor composed. When the judge addressed me, I responded with confidence, never allowing my father's presence or Grant's smug glances to unnerve me. I wasn't just Catherine, their daughter or sister. I was Catherine Mercer, attorney for the plaintiff, and I intended to win. Grant, on the other hand, faltered. His arguments were weak, his preparation lacking, but I didn't let it show on my face. I treated him as I would any opposing counsel with respect, but no leniency. Every time he misspoke or twisted facts, I countered with clarity, grounding my points in solid evidence and case law. My father sat there silently for most of it, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to earn his approval anymore. I was here to do my job, and I was doing it well. Session after session, it became painfully clear at least to think that I was dominating the case. Grant floundered, his arguments collapsing under the weight of my counterpoints. My preparation exposed his inexperience, leaving him scrambling for answers he didn't have. Even my father tried to step in, but not even he could undo the damage. The tide had turned, and everyone in that room knew it. By the fourth session, they offered a settlement. I caught the frustration in my father's face as their counsel approached with terms that heavily favored my client. A few back-and-forth negotiations later, we had a deal. As the paperwork was signed, I glanced across the room. My father looked defeated, maybe even regretful. Grant didn't look at me at all. They gathered their things and left without a word, no handshake, no acknowledgement, not even a curt "well done." It stung more than I wanted to admit. A part of me had hoped for something, anything, that would show they had seen me, truly seen me, for what I was capable of. Instead, they walked away, silent and defeated, leaving me standing there with the weight of unfinished business pressing against my chest. I pushed it aside. I had won the case. That was what mattered. That evening, back at the firm, my colleagues greeted me with applause. Richard was the first to reach me, clapping me on the shoulder with a proud grin. "Well done, Catherine," he said, raising a glass of champagne. "You were flawless in there. That settlement is a huge win for us. Your client couldn't have asked for a better advocate." The team had arranged a small celebration in the break room, drinks, hors d'oeuvres, even a visit from my client, who shook my hand firmly. "You were incredible, Catherine," they said. "We couldn't have done this without you." For the first time that day, I smiled. Surrounded by people who valued my work, my skill, my determination, I felt the kind of validation no words from my father or Grant could have given me. This victory was mine, and I owned it. Later that night, I sat there by my apartment window, a glass of wine in hand. The city lights casting long shadows across the room. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only quiet and unanswered questions. I replayed the courtroom in my mind, tightening of my father's jaw. The way Grant couldn't even look at me. I had expected anger, maybe even resentment, but their silence felt heavier. For years, I had worked to prove myself to my father, to show him I was worthy not just of his name, but of a place in the firm I had once idolized. And yet, after winning a case against him, I wasn't sure what I had really won. Did he finally see me for who I was, or was I just a reminder of his failure? The questions lingered, unanswered, as I stared out at the Dallas skyline, wondering if the ties I had severed could ever truly be mended. The next morning, the usual buzz of the office greeted me, phones ringing, conversations humming. I barely had time to settle in before Richard appeared beside my desk, a careful look on his face. "Catherine," he said, his voice warm but cautious, "your father is here. He's waiting in your office." I stared. "My father?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral, though my stomach twisted. Richard nodded. "He came in about 20 minutes ago. Said he wanted to speak with you. Take your time. I'll hold your calls." I thanked him, though my mind was already spinning as I walked down the hall. When I opened the door, there he was, Mercer sitting across from my desk, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, but there was something there, a crease in his brow, a hesitation, regret, maybe. "Catherine," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I closed the door behind me, uncertain of what was coming next. "Dad," I said, keeping my tone even, "what are you doing here?" He stood slowly, brushing his hands down his suit jacket, as if steadying himself. "I came here to talk," he said. His voice was measured, serious, to say some things. I should have said something already. Instead, I walked over to my desk, setting my back down with deliberate care. "All right," I said, folding my arms, "I'm listening." He hesitated, glancing out the window before turning back to me. "You were brilliant in that courtroom, Catherine," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I've seen some of the best lawyers in the business, but what you did was remarkable. You were prepared, professional, relentless. There was no doubt about who the better attorney was." His words caught me off guard, but I kept my expression steady, waiting for him to continue. "I spent so much of my life believing legacy meant preserving what was," he admitted, regret spreading through his voice, "that a son should carry on what his father built. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing Brent to step up even when I knew, deep down, he wasn't ready. Maybe he never was." He ran a hand through his silver hair, sighing. "But I see now that I was wrong. You've worked harder than anyone, Catherine. You've earned everything you have, and I failed to recognize that. I failed you." I blinked. This was the man who had spent years dismissing my ambition, who had told me to accept a future that wasn't mine, and now he was standing here, admitting fault. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, cautious. "Why tell me this after everything that's happened?" He met my gaze, his blue eyes filled with something I wasn't sure I'd ever seen in them before. "Because I finally understand," he said simply. "I've been a fool. Grant isn't ready. He may never be. But you've proven you have what it takes, not just to succeed, but to lead." He stepped closer, his tone measured yet urgent. "Catherine, I want you to come back, to take your rightful place at Mercer Associates. The firm needs you. I need you." The words hung in the air. For so long, I had fought for this moment, dreamed of hearing these exact words from him. But now that they were here, I wasn't sure I wanted them. "What about Grant?" I asked finally. "Where does he fit into this?" My father's face tightened. He exhaled slowly, nodding as if he had already anticipated the question. "Grant will stay," he said, "but in a role that suits his strengths. This isn't about him, Catherine. This is about giving you what you've always deserved." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words settle over me. "I need time," I said at last, my voice even firm. "This isn't something I can decide right away. A lot has happened, and I need to figure out what's best for me." He nodded, his expression serious yet understanding. "Of course," he said, "take all the time you need. I don't expect an answer today, just needed you to know." He turned toward the door, but before he left, he glanced back at me. "Catherine," he said softly, "I know I haven't said this enough, or maybe ever, but I am proud of you." He hesitated, his gaze filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Watching you in that courtroom, you were better than I ever was, better than I ever imagined." His words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I just stared at him, unable to respond. Then, with a small, almost hesitant smile, he turned and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank into my chair, his words still echoing in my mind. Better than I ever was. For years, I had fought to prove myself, to show that I was more than just his daughter, that I was strong, capable, and deserving of respect. Now, hearing those words, I felt a surge of pride I couldn't ignore. But this wasn't just about him anymore. I was proud of myself for standing my ground, for thriving on my own, for showing the world and my father exactly what I was capable of. Now, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the choice keeps me awake. My father's offer is everything I've worked for, everything I thought I wanted. But going back means stepping into a world where I was once dismissed, where I'd have to navigate old wounds and fractured trust. It means working alongside Grant, knowing how little he valued what we both stood to represent. And yet, staying where I am has its own challenges. This firm has been good to me. I've grown here in ways I never expected, but it's not my legacy. It's not Mercer Associates, the place I once dreamed of running. If I go back, I could shape that legacy on my terms, prove that the name belongs to me just as much as anyone else. I haven't made up my mind yet. The choice feels impossible. But maybe you can't help. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps a lot and ensures you won't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.